Hi, welcome to the Louie File. We're going to continue on in our study of the letter to the Galatians, and this time we're going to look into Galatians 5, and what an awesome chapter. I find myself going back to this over and over again. It's so good. So I'm just going to start off in verse 1. In Galatians 5 it says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free." Isn't that great? "Therefore keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." So right off the bat, it's encouraging and it's energizing. It's for freedom that we're set free, and he's telling us to stand in that freedom. And he says, and don't be subject again to a yoke of slavery. And you know, some Bibles might say bondage. Now if you just left it right there, that would be pretty good, and then you could just fill in the blank as to what kind of bondage or slavery he was talking about. You know, I mean, you could say, don't be tangled up in a yoke of slavery to drugs and alcohol or sex. Don't be caught up in gambling. Don't be, I mean, well, you could name all kinds of things, right? All kinds of addictions and bondages could be placed there. And maybe that would be correct, but let's look at what the Apostle Paul is really talking about here. He's got something specific in mind in this letter. He says, "Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you receive circumcision, Christ will be of no benefit to you. And I testify again to every man who receives circumcision that he is under obligation to keep the whole law. You have been severed from Christ. You who are seeking to be justified by law, you have fallen from grace. For we through the Spirit by faith are waiting for the hope of righteousness. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but faith working through love." Oh my, so right off the bat he's telling us what this bondage is religious bondage. It's bondage to the law. And he's telling them, don't circumcision is the first step backwards. Oh my gosh, this is quite something to get a hold of. You know, in the Old Testament, God instituted this thing, circumcision, as a sign of the covenant between him and Abraham. I mean, this was not a bad thing. I mean, even today, and I don't want to get too into this topic per se, but generally we think of this as being a health issue, and it is. The average person having a circumcision done on their young boy is not thinking of religious stuff, which is fine. But in the Old Testament, it was a sign of the covenant. It was a sign of the bond and the covenant between God and man. So here Paul is saying that if you do this, then Christ is going to be of no benefit to you. That sounds just outlandish to the mind of a Jew that grew up hearing about this covenant. That sounds crazy. All right, so what is the Apostle Paul telling us? He's saying this because he knows the context here. Just the act of circumcision doesn't sever you from Christ. So don't misunderstand that. What he's getting at here is these religious Jews had come into this area, and they were coercing and pushing these new converts to Christ to be circumcised and start following the law of Moses. So Paul he knows what this implies. So he's saying if you let them talk you into this, then you're basically turning your back on Christ. And that's, you know, a lot of times you hear this term fall from grace or fallen from grace, and I think people believe that you can commit some specific sin or some specific amount of sin, and you could find yourself fallen from grace, like losing your salvation, being lost eternally, or I don't know how they might define that. But right here it's very clear what this term is saying. He's saying, verse 4, you have been severed from Christ. I mean, he says if you do that, you got to, you know, if you get circumcised, then you're obliged to keep the whole law. And he says then you've been severed from Christ. And he says if you're seeking to be justified by the law, you've fallen from grace. So there you have it. It's not saying that you committed some specific dastardly sin, murder, adultery, or something like that makes you fall from grace. He's saying that if you start seeking to make yourself justified with God by obedience to the law, then you have been severed from Christ and you have fallen from grace. And this is really the crux of this whole letter that Paul wrote here, because he's saying you can't start out by grace and faith in the Spirit and then finish up by the law in the flesh. You can't do that. But so many people come to Christ and they understand that it's by grace. We say it all the time. It's by grace you are saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves. It is a gift of God, right? So we can't do anything to make ourselves saved or right with God. And everyone receives that pretty well. But not too long after that, they begin to think that it's on them to keep themselves or to make themselves stay right with God. So they're saved by grace, but we're kept by works of the law. Now see, that's not right at all. So Paul is drawing the line here, and he's saying that you're either seeking to be justified by the works of the law, or you are justified by grace in what Christ has done, the promise of God. So we have law people and we have grace people. And then we have people trying to straddle them, and we try to have grace and law mixed together, but it doesn't work. I heard one person called it Galatianism. And I thought that was a great term. It's someone that starts off by faith and tries to finish up by works of their own. And he's saying that through the Spirit, we're righteous. We're waiting for this hope of righteousness. And in Christ, circumcision and uncircumcision isn't the point, but the point is faith working through love. That's it. Faith working through love. Now that sounds a lot better, doesn't it? All right, so stand fast in your freedom is what I'll say to you today, and I'm going to cut it a little bit short this time. We'll pick up there where we left off on the next video. I hope you'll stick with me for the rest of Galatians. Thanks.